Hello, kids. Today we will learn how to ask and answer questions about how often we do things. Before we start, we need to learn about the adverbs of frequency. Adverbs of frequency are used to describe the repetition of something. They are used to show routines and activities that are repeated. We use adverbs of frequency to ask about how often something happens. For example, how often do you brush your teeth? How often do you study English? How often do you take a vacation? How often do you watch TV? How often do you sleep late? If something is repeated every single day, you say always. How often do you brush your teeth? I always brush my teeth. How often do you sleep late? I never sleep late. How often do you study English? I usually study English. How often do you take a vacation? I often take a vacation. How often do you watch TV? I sometimes watch TV. I walk my dog every day. Here, the action is repeated every single day. I walk my dog every day. So, I I always
Correct.
I always walk my dog. I always walk my dog. So, if the action is repeated every single day, we use always. I don't drink Pepsi. I don't drink Pepsi. So, if the action is never repeated, you say I never. I never.
Correct.
Now, let's go to the book. Learn language. Question number 1. Look, listen, and read. How often do you go to a restaurant? I sometimes go to a restaurant. How often do you visit the library? I often visit the library. So, we use how often do you to ask about the frequency or the times that the person likes to do something. And the answer is I always, I usually, I often, I sometimes, I never. It depends on the repetition of the action. So, if the action is repeated every single day, we say I always. If the action is never repeated, you say I never. And in between, we have usually, often, and sometimes. Let's move to question number 2. Write, tick or cross, then ask and answer. You will read all of these activities and try to ask yourself how often. How often do you go to the beach? For example, I sometimes go to the beach. How often do you play football? For example, I never play football. How often do you go to the playground? For example, I sometimes go to the playground. How often do you go swimming? For example, I never go swimming. How often do you read a book? I often read a book. So, one more time, when we need to ask about the repetition of something, we say, how often do you? How often do you? And the answer should be I, always, usually, often, sometimes, or never. Now, let's move to the activity book. Question number 1. Read and complete. We will check this table. These triangles refer to the repetition of the action. So, if the action is repeated every day, we will use always. If the action is never repeated, we will use never. And in between, we have usually, often, and sometimes. Usually, often, and sometimes. So, one more time. If the action is repeated every single day, it means that it's 100%. If the action is never repeated, it means that it's 0%. And in between, we have usually, often, and sometimes. Now let's move to question number 2. Read and answer. How often do you go to the beach? I sometimes go to the beach. Question number 2. How often do you read a book? Here we have 1, 2, 3, 3 triangles, which means often, often. So how often do you read a book? I often read a book. Question number 3. How often do you play football? Here we have 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 triangles, which means usually. How often do you play football? I usually play football. Question number 4. How often do you go swimming? Here we have cross, so it means never. How often do you go swimming? I never go swimming. Kindly check these videos for further help with the adverbs of frequency. That's it for today. Stay safe, study hard, and goodbye.